So, so I'm gonna go to my next series. Armed doesn't mean dangerous. And before I go into this, one of the biggest things that I want to say is I'm not convincing anybody to go out and buy a gun. I know when I show this project, it becomes a conversation of if I believe in gun rights or do I not believe in gun rights. And that's not what I'm trying to convince you at all of. What I essentially want to show and what I'm going to show through history is that over history, African Americans, minorities, and women have had a troubled relationship with the Second Amendment. And this is historical fact. This is not a pen, and I'm going to show you through this project. So the series that I'm going to talk about again is Armed Doesn't Mean Dangerous, and this is the project that has pretty much taken up most of my attention for the last years, probably about the last year. And I want to dedicate it to my father, who passed a little bit before I joined the Army. And he really did teach me a lot about being a man and protecting myself. So I thought it was only right to talk about him. And before I even go a little bit any further, I want to say that the reason why I think it's so important to show this project, mind you, I'm not trying to convince anybody in here to buy a gun or agree with gun ownership, because I know that there's reasonable arguments on both sides. All I'm trying to show is that historical fact will show, and I'm going to show you this, that African Americans, minorities, and women have had a complicated history with the Second Amendment. And my father, you know, I'm gonna just keep this real short and move forward. But I think when we start talking about topics, and if a black person come out and the idea of the gun, I'm from Chicago, the idea of a gun has been something that's been reserved for a certain person in America, or certain people identify with that. And my father showed me that, hey, you can use this as a tool to protect yourself against people that don't like you, or just to protect your family. And most of the reasons why I came to gun ownership myself is because of my father. So I want to talk about, again, like, I'm very big on research and not just going out and taking a photograph because I think it's like cool. Like, I research. One of the books that I came to initially is This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed by Charles E. Cobb. He was one of the, he documented a lot of firsthand testimonies of the civil rights era. And he makes a claim in his book about how guns made the civil rights era possible. You know, a lot of people don't know that Martin Luther King owned a gun, but we'll talk about that later. In this book, The Second, Racing Guns in a Fatally Unequal America by Carol Anderson, she really goes in detail historically. The other book was more about more firsthand accounts of how people use how African Americans use guns to pretty much make the civil rights era possible. This book goes into like American laws and policies and bring all that out. So we're gonna move forward. So let's get it cracking. So in order to really understand in recent history how African Americans have had a complicated relationship with the Second Amendment, you have to know about the Mulford Act. The Mulford Act was a California bill that targeted members of the Black Panthers who were essentially using their right to open carry. And guess what? The NRA promoted this. They promoted this because at this time it was so frightening. It was so bad to see African Americans, you know, utilizing their gun rights. You know, and this goes back into a greater detail about why do African Americans not identify with the Second Amendment? Because history will show us whenever we did, something came about to show us that this is not for you. And this is one of the moments. And I talk about the NRA because they had a different tone again when it came to the Bundy standoff in Nevada, where actual armed militia took their weapons and pointed it at citizens and law officials, and nothing happened to them. No laws came about or anything like that. So that juxtaposition begins to show guns are reserved for you, and this group of people cannot use guns. And I start to think about, like, what are the images that I'm missing out on? Being from Chicago, the only time that I seen guns in the hands of African Americans were during times of crime, when they were talking about drug dealers and gangbangers. And I started to think, like, dang, not one law-abiding citizen lives in my community. Not one that uses this just to protect their family. Just to protect their family, you know. For example, this woman these are the type of images that I didn't see. Women being in positions of power, being able to, like, protect their child. I just want to, I get real emotional with this, but I just did some work for BuzzFeed, and I photographed a woman who is fighting up for abortion laws, and she received an abortion. But she was scared to show where she lived, because she knew that by using her freedom of speech, people would want to harm her. And I couldn't help but have it in the back of my mind that if you utilize your Second Amendment rights, you wouldn't have to worry about that. I mean, don't get me wrong, like, the threat will always be there. You can't protect all situations, but I love to see people protect themselves. And again, I thought about the type of images that I weren't seeing. I never saw a black man in a business suit with their gun. Where was these images? Because if you go online and Google gun owners in America, you'll see other people that look like this with their guns. And I was like, where are these images? So I set out to create an archive of imagery that documented African Americans with their guns. I started to think about, again, this question is running in my head. What about the people that dress like me, that just wear a normal t-shirt with some joggers, you know, that like dogs? You know, I mean, in my community in Chicago, I see people with pit bulls or Rottweilers, and I don't feel at harm, but people do, because I was reading one thing I like is honesty. And I was reading a post on social media that somebody had put in the comment section of this project, and the person had said that, you know what, until I saw your body of work, I never knew that I really do have a problem with seeing black people in guns. Like, I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm not from the community, or maybe I feel like I'm a target because I feel more comfortable with maybe like a gun in the hand of a white person, but like, I don't feel threatened when I see it in the hands of a white person. I feel threatened when I see it in the hands of a black person. And initially I was a little bit stood off, but I was like, you know what? I ain't gonna be mad at you, because you admitting, and admitting is the first step. Like, and this is what the whole project is about, like confronting that there is an issue and like moving forward. And I thought, like, dang, I never been in the inside of a gun range. Like, how could I possibly know how to use a firearm to protect my family if I never been in a gun range? But you see here in Texas that people start training their children on firearms at a young age, but this doesn't happen in my hometown. So, again, I said we're gonna talk about history, because one of the things that I noticed about this project is so many different opinions. It's so many different undertones when you start talking about guns, that people start to offer up their own opinions and offer up what they think I'm talking about. So, like, no, I'm not gonna talk about opinions. I'm just gonna talk about actual laws and actual historic moments that actually existed. The Uniform Militia Act of 1792, which essentially was a law that mandated that all white able-bodied males between the age of 18 and 40, don't quote me on the age range, but about 18 to 40, go out and join their state's militia. What about African Americans? What about minorities? What about women? You know, they weren't mandated by law. And these are the type of laws that start to paint the picture of who can identify with the Second Amendment and who doesn't. And when you look at into today's society, where if you were to hold up the poster child of who buys a gun, you wouldn't think about African Americans, minorities, or women, because laws like this starts to create the platform of who can identify. You know, who are the protectors of America? According to law at this time, it was white able-bodied males between the age of 18 and 40. One of the things that I didn't mention, that not only did they have to join their state militia, they were mandated to buy a gun. Not only were they mandated to buy a gun, they were trained on their weapons. So these group of people were training on their weapons while everybody else in society were just like not training on their weapons. And in my opinion, becoming victims. Because if these are the only group of people trained, what does it mean for this other group? Again, so I started thinking about, okay, boom. They didn't document, like, you know, black people didn't have guns, minorities didn't have guns, and women. And I started to think about it. Because of that, what are the type of positions that what are the type of images that I'm not seeing? And I was like, dang, like a woman in a dominant position over her husband, not in a dominant, but in a strong position that she could hold down the household if an intruder broke in the house. You know, these were the type of images that I was not seeing, and I wanted to go create that. And you, again, when you start talking about the Second Amendment, and women, according to that law, wasn't mandated by law to go out and buy a gun. And again, remember where I told you that everybody that you meet, every now and then you meet somebody that makes a great impact. This person made an impact because when you start talking about the transition into like gun ownership, I think this is like one of the most important stories, because this woman experienced a domestic violence incident, and she made it up in her mind that she never wanted to be a victim. So she went out, trained herself on a firearm, you know, exercises, and like preparing herself to be the protector of her family, because there is no man in the house and she has to do it. And these are the type of images, and these are the type of people that we weren't hearing about. Black hunters. I never saw a black hunter until I moved to Texas. By the way, yeah, and let me stay on track. I never saw a black hunter until I moved to Texas. And talking about that, I think is very important, because where I live definitely had an impact on how I view the Second Amendment. Growing up in Chicago with some of the most relaxed gun laws in the country versus moving to Texas. I mean, having some of the most restrictive gun laws in the world, versus Texas, who have some of the most unrestrictive gun laws. And I'm just like looking at it like, dang, like, I mean, words cut deep. So like, I'm pretty sure like a lot of people I don't want people to agree with me, but like, I'm just talking about my analysis versus how I see the world through my lens. I remember walking down those streets, going to school and getting jumped by gangs. I remember going into a store with my little sister, and the store was robbed at gunpoint while I was in it. And I made up in my mind that I don't care what anybody thinks about guns. I need this to protect myself and my family, because I will never be in another position again with my sister and I'm not able to protect her. And my grandfather lives in Chicago, 80 years old. Why should he have to fight and scrape for his life because somebody decided that they were going to try to harm him that day? To me, that just seems very unjust and unfair. I do believe there are some crazy gun laws out here. I just want to throw that out there. But there has to be a balance. And I don't know what that is. I'm not a lawmaker. I'm just holding history up and letting us examine and let the lawmakers make decisions, right? But there has to be a balance because a woman that's walking down an alley in the middle of the night, why should she have to defend herself against a cock-swole dude with her pepper spray? She didn't ask to be in this fight. I just don't think that it's fair that she has to do that. So I started meeting people in the community, and I was shocked because people were questioning my views on guns coming from Chicago. Like, I always viewed guns as bad. However, this was a pastor, talking what he felt about guns and tying it into scripture and stuff like that. And I was just like, you know what? Like, I'm not going to disagree with you. And I found like the more and more people that I talked to in this community, like, I didn't have to agree with them 100%, but they kind of like opened my eyes a little bit more, like why it's necessary to protect yourself. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Actually, right now. So growing up as a young man, like, I always compared Malcolm X versus Martin Luther King. I don't know why I did that. I always did. But I always compared them because I saw, like, okay, these are two men that essentially wanted the same thing, like liberation of black people living in a fair society. But I realized that people really didn't care if they were violent or nonviolent. What they really hated was their freedom of speech. They didn't like what they were saying. And when your freedom of speech becomes so sharp that people don't like you and are willing to kill you, you do need the Second Amendment. You do need the Second Amendment to protect the freedom of speech. And I know that a lot of us in here are journalists or artists. We might create something that one day that's like people severely disagree with. Somebody severely disagree with. And I believe that I want to say this. There's some bad stuff that happens with guns, mass killings, all, really bad. And I'm not ignorant to that fact. But I ultimately believe that I want the ability to protect myself. If nobody else don't want to use it, I want to use it because I started looking at key leaders like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Kennedy, all people assassinated and killed for utilizing their freedom of speech. And somebody that lives and breathes freedom of speech, without it, I wouldn't be able to create the work that I do today. I need to own a gun because I'm pretty sure somebody probably don't like what I'm talking about right now. And, that's just the nature of the beast. Again, I'm not going to talk about every photo, but these are people that I met in the community. I didn't see photos of black families with guns. And when I saw this, man, I wanted to create like this sensational photo, and I did create it. Like, I had them with like all these guns around them, and I'm like, yeah, that's the photo that people want to see. And he was like really protective of his family, but like I sat down and I was just like, look, that's not the photo I want to make of you because people are already scared of the guns. They see guns, they formulate their opinion, and they move forward. What I want to do with you, I want to show how you're utilizing this to protect your family. And I would say probably about 2 months of convincing, I was able to throw the sensational photo out and was able to create this one. I never saw photos of black people training, These are some of the things that I would think about as I photographed this pop project. I never saw same-sex couples with guns. I mean, if you think about the current climate today, like, that is definitely something that people disagree with and may want to harm them, and I believe that they should have the right to protect themselves. So, the Second Amendment is formed, right? We got to go back to history, like at the very core. The Second Amendment is formed, and during this time, you had the slave states in the other states, right? That made their money in a different way. The only reason why the Second Amendment made it into the Constitution was for slave states to be able to have the right to arm their militias. Why? We'll get to that in another slide. But the reason why the Second Amendment made it into the Constitution is because the slave states did not trust the other states to come to their aid, if a slave revolt happened. Because a lot of slave revolts were happening around this time. If a slave revolt happened, the only person that had a vested interest in crushing the slave revolt were the southern states, because they made their money off of slavery, free labor. And they fought very hard. They fought very hard to be able to have that right, because they knew that they were not going to be able to call one of the other states to come to their aid. That is the only reason the other states actually fought against it, but they knew that the only way that they would bring the South into the Union is if they made this deal. That's the only reason that it's in the Second Amendment, to be at this time period during slavery was for Southern slaves to have the right to be able to protect their economy. Their economy was based off of free labor. And there was no way they were coming into the Union if they did not have the ability to protect their economy. So again, I'm gonna bounce back between photos and history, but I'm not really gonna bounce on the photos too much. I'm not gonna talk about the photos too much. I wanna spend time talking about the history. And if there's questions at the end, we'll take that. Again, photos that I weren't seeing, women being able to arm themselves. Okay, I didn't include this slide, but I'll talk about it anyway. I have to talk about this because it's very important. The slave states, slaves versus militias. In order to really understand this and understand that the Second Amendment literally was racist from its core, from its creation, and was never meant to be for African Americans or any other minority groups. Because at this time, before we're talking about slavery, at that time, women didn't even have rights. Women really didn't start getting rights until the civil rights era. You have the feminist movement and stuff like that, But at this time, only people that had guns was white males. But why I have to talk about slaves versus militias? Because a lot of people make the argument in today's society that a lot of racist people, in my opinion, I'm just going to be blunt, this project is really about being blunt, is that the reason why they want to be a part of the militia is because they want to protect America, and they want to protect America, right? But we know that it has a racist history. The only thing that militias were ever good for during the time the Second Amendment was created was crushing slave revolts. They were not good at fighting against a grandstanding army. You would see in documented history, a lot of people would start fighting for about a couple minutes and they'll go home for dinner. The fight is still going on. You would see that time and time again with militias. They weren't a professional grandstanding army. People knew that we needed to unite to have a grandstanding army to stand up really any chance of a professional fighting force. And that's how we get our grandstanding army that it is to this day. At that time, there were militias. And again, people, in my opinion, racist people will make the claim that they want to be a part of the militia because, they want to fight for America and they want to be the beacons of truth when people come to do the history harm, do the country harm. But in that time frame when militias were created, their only true purpose, the only thing that they were effective at was crushing slave revolts. And I wanted to end it on there, and that's the end of the series. So I'll take questions. So thanks for sticking that out. Questions? All right, question right here. Could you repeat that? Oh, oh. How's my military? How's my career in the military impacted my work? So, so let me just foreshadow that with that I'm currently still in the military, and um, I have, you know, basically it is against UCMJ law to say anything about the military that impacts them in a negative way. So I just want to foreshadow that before I say anything. But I still do have freedom of speech. How has my career in the military impacted my work? I would say greatly, because one of the first times that I ever held a gun in my hand was in the military. As a black man in Chicago, I don't think I would have ever held a gun if it wasn't for the military. So how has it impacted my work? I would say positively in one way, because it created the platform for me being able to feel comfortable enough to hold a gun in order to start doing further research. However, on the opposite side, there's certain things that I can't talk about or certain people I can't talk about. And I just try to balance that as positively as possible, while utilizing my freedom of speech, but make sure I'm being respectful of the people who I raised up my hand to serve. Yep. Next question. I notice. I just want to say this. I know this a very touchy topic, and there may be questions, but people may be dang, should I ask it? These are the spaces that I want to create. It's okay. I've came from both sides and I have opinions on both sides. So I'm not gonna be mad at anybody if you ask me an edgy question, or not. I'm gonna start asking my own self questions.
I have a general question.
Roger.
What's next with this project? Where are you going with it? Where are you at? Is it done? Is it not done?
No, I don't think it's done. I got a lot to say. I'm 30 years old. I didn't pick up a gun until 2 years ago, when people in Texas started training their children on guns at a very small age. One of the people that I photographed said that they wanted to teach their daughter, a teenage daughter, how to utilize a weapon, their black daughter, because when their black daughter went to school, they felt like they were at a disadvantage, because the people that they were sending their kids to school with, all their kids knew how to own a gun. They owned guns in their house. They had gun shells. But when this black girl went to school, she, if it came down to a fight, or it came down to a gunfight, hopefully that never happened in high school or for a teenager, but her daughter would seriously be at a disadvantage. It's impossible to talk about everything, all the undertones in relation to this project, but I believe I have a lot more to say. Your question?
Can you speak to why you chose large format?
Oh, you want me to speak to why speak to why I chose large format. So, to be honest, I always wanted to use the format. And one of the first times I got my opportunity to use it, I want to shout out Jay from the LA Times. I was there doing my internship with the LA Times, and we did a Netflix shoot, and he whipped out this big equipment, set this 4x5 camera up, and I just fell in love. I'm like, when I get some money, I'm going to get it. And I did it. But for me, personally, the reason why I've been shooting in large format, and I got to do my research on this, because I don't know if this is just true in my head. I feel like this is a format that black people weren't documented in this way with, and during the time of the creation of this camera. So I feel like a certain purpose to reverse history and still kind of this tool that saw history, this tool that was able to witness history. These type of conversations were not being had, or at least I didn't see it. Um, at least I didn't see it, and I know that some work does exist. Um, but I made it in my mind that I wanted to create and document black conversations and conversations that affected my community and people like me on a platform that they probably would have not had their story told on during the creation of that platform. So that's why I chose it. Question right there.
What is your opinion of, and are you going to do any different work based on Texas new law, the
Constitutional carry.
the constitutional carry?
Definitely great. Good point. Like, his question was, am I going to do any work on Texas new law of constitutional carry? Again, there's a lot of different undertones. So like when I'm walking on this path, like I could see myself like hopping over here, like, dang, you could talk about this a little bit more. Or like hopping over here, like, you could talk about this a little bit more. But like ultimately what I'm truly want to talk about is how African Americans, minorities, and women have had a complicated history with the Second Amendment. So whenever I see that I'm starting to waver away from that path or get an interest in something else, I just kind of like hop myself back on a glide path. And maybe sometime later down the road, I believe that this project definitely opens itself to different conversations and different topics. When I have the time and I feel like I'm done, I'll circle back around. But right now, that's what I want to talk about. I'm gonna come back. Were you about to raise your hand back there? Okay, right.
I really appreciate this project because to me it feels like your goal is to complicate the imagery that you were seeing in relation to black film. And
Right.
as you know, like you talked about, there is such a racist history that comes along with gun ownership. And I feel like, I'm curious how you feel like, do you think that your images could be co-opted to that racist system to promote, like further perpetuate that racism?
I get what you're saying.
You know?
Pretty much the question that I'm going to summarize, and I think about this a lot, so I'm so happy you asked this question. You're asking me, like, the images that I'm making, do I believe that some type of way is still promote, like, this racist agenda?
I know, yeah, and I know that's obviously not your,
Yeah, but
but
it's still indirectly.
yeah, and like just as a photographer, we have to think about the implications of our work. So yeah, just be interested to hear how you.
I'm so happy you asked me that question. Yes, it does. I know for a fact that some people that want to promote their agenda of the Second Amendment can definitely like see this photo and like repost it just to say that, see, black people are doing it, women are doing it, other minority groups are doing it. So the Second Amendment is not racist for everybody. I'm very cautious of that. I know that there will be somebody that repost his work for that, but truth shines. And I believe that ultimately when people look at this work, ultimately what they will see is another truth that has not been talked about. And I'm more interested in that. I know that there's gonna be undertones, different purposes that people may use these photos for, but ultimately I just wanna bring another conversation to the table and bring this history that is not talked about. You know? Any last questions? Right here.
Because you've had so much creative success in the past couple of years doing large format, is there any part of you that like wants to like go buy your digital camera equipment back and start shooting digital again, or do you feel really like dedicated and focused on just doing large format?
Yeah, I definitely feel dedicated to doing large format. But I'm currently doing the Eddie Adams workshop right now, and they're forcing me to use my digital camera. And to be honest, it's actually been fun, you know, being able to stop taking portraits for a while and start, you know, thinking with a different side of my brain. Will I go back? Yes, because like there's so many undertones in this project that really does not open itself to be documented by a large format camera. To like lug it around and like you'll miss moments like 35 millimeter or digital, like that's the format I would want to really like capture like little small moments, like a mother chilling out with her daughter or doing things in the house, that is a format that would properly document that. A large format, again, all these are just tools. All these is tools. Like, I feel like this tool for me is better for portraiture, and it lends itself to be more slow, meticulous, listen to what this person is telling me, and create a portrait. One more question, and then I'm gonna close it. I like you be coming through with the questions. No, go ahead.
This question isn't project specific, but what do you have next coming up for you? Like, are there any projects that you are formulating or currently working on?
So I'm getting out the army. I'm getting out the army soon. So definitely, like, I've been doing this, full-time army. So in a little while, I'm gonna be able to it's so many things I want to do, so many things I want to talk about. It's so many different ways I want to add on to this body of work, and I believe I've definitely been capable of doing it now. But I think within the next 6 months to a year, I'm gonna have more time. I'm gonna be able to do a lot more. So I'm kind of interested to see where this project will go. And I thank you for this question. Thank you for that question. I appreciate all the questions, and I appreciate everybody for coming out today and listening to my body of work. Thank you.
You guys give it up for Christian Lee.